So it's been a pretty tumultuous time for Warner Brothers and the DCEU these past few weeks, and honestly, it's hard to think of a time in the last 10 years where the DCEU hasn't been in some form of upheaval. Now the latest news is the announcement that James Gunn and Peter Safran will be the new architects of a new rebooted DC universe, and of course because it's Warner Brothers, this news had to be delivered in the worst way possible, with it also being announced that Henry Cavill was being let go as Superman, just a few weeks after announcing he was back in the role. To start, this whole situation with Henry Cavill and the way it was handled was really dumb. Like next level dumb even for Warner Brothers. I thought this stupid mismanagement stuff was meant to go away under Zaslav, but this is arguably the dumbest thing to come out of Warner Brothers since the start of the DCEU. I can't see any other movie studio handling something this poorly, and I'm including famously awful studio Sony Pictures in that. The studio that released Morbius into cinemas twice. People were excited for Henry Cavill coming back, man. For 4 years people want to know if this guy was ever going to be Superman again. And then they finally got their answer, and for once it was actually good news. Henry Cavill is back, and he's here to stay. And Warner Brothers actually got themselves some goodwill with this move. People were genuinely excited about this news, so it was pretty out of left field when a few weeks later James Gunn announced that Cavill won't in fact be Superman ever again. But don't worry guys, James Gunn is discussing other potential DC films where Henry Cavill won't be playing Superman. Yeah, that's exactly what people want. A DC film with Henry Cavill where he isn't playing Superman but a totally different character. Thanks so much, James. That's just what I want. Henry Cavill, man, you've got to feel bad for the guy. He's the actor that's had it the worst of all the actors in the DCEU by a long mile. And what makes it so much more sad is that Henry Cavill really wanted to continue on with the character. He's got a genuine passion for the role even after all the Justice League mustache bullshit and years of Warner Brothers indecision. Warner Brothers suddenly turning around and kicking him out of the role after having him announce he was back just feels really cruel. Looking back at the Happy Sad podcast just after Cavill announced he was coming back is heartbreaking knowing how excited he was about returning. Leaving Cavill go as Superman is a really big mistake, and it's an especially bad move given that it's to allow for a reboot of the Superman franchise, focusing on what's basically going to be an origin story for Superman, a film nobody was asking for. I don't really understand what Warner Brothers' issue is here. I mean, we're at the point with superhero films now where we have 3 Spider-Men running around in the same film. We have 2 versions of Batman in The Flash, and a standalone Batman franchise with Robert Pattinson on top of that. But we have to definitively get rid of Henry Cavill for some reason. We can't have 2 versions of Superman running around. And what's strange is, a few weeks later it was confirmed that Ta-Nehisi Coates' Superman project was still in active development. So we can have 2 versions of Superman then. It's just that neither of them can be played by the actor people actually want to see in the role for some reason. This Henry Cavill news turned so many people off. And really, can you blame them? This fiasco with Cavill, and that's what it is, a fiasco, is kind of emblematic of the level of mismanagement that fans have come to expect from Warner Brothers now. Fans have been dealing with these frustrating and, let's be honest here, really stupid decisions from Warner Brothers pretty much for the last 10 years. Fans just have this view of Warner Brothers now as the studio that just can't make a right decision when it comes to DC on film. People just expect Warner Brothers to make the worst possible decisions when it comes to these movies. I mean, just look at some of the decisions they've made in the last few years. You've a great cast, which Warner Brothers never actually did anything with, and in some cases actively pushed back on using. You have some really talented directors that you can't seem to run off projects fast enough. You announce projects and then just never make them, or just outright cancel them. Inking a 5-year deal with J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot production studio for $250 million in 2019 that as of yet has not produced a single film or TV series. And while we're talking about some really dumb decisions, let's take a look at Warner Brothers' DC film slate and how that's evolved, I guess, over the last 10 years. Guillermo del Toro on Justice League Dark. Yes please, I can't think of a director better suited to that project. Oh. Nightwing. I love Nightwing, man. Can't wait for this film. A new Superman project with Michael B. Jordan attached, focusing on Val Zod. Sign me up. Static Shock. 2 years after announcement, no updates. A TV series focusing on the Green Lanterns. I'll take some of that. I do love the Green Lanterns. 3 years later and still nothing. Now it's being rebooted. All this stuff, it just paints a picture of Warner Brothers as a studio that's just fundamentally broken and stupid. Say what you want about Marvel Studios, and there's plenty to critique there, especially lately, but one thing they are good at is building hype and momentum around their films. People do look forward to the bigger Marvel films. People, not just fans, but general audiences, were generally excited for the bigger Marvel films like Infinity War and Endgame, and for Spider-Man No Way Home, and seeing Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield back again. The same goes for Hugh Jackman coming back as Wolverine in Deadpool 3. People are excited about that. Marvel got some good buzz with that decision to bring back Jackman. But I can't think of a single time when there was some good buzz around a DC film in the same way. The only thing that comes even kind of close was the Superman cameo at the end of Black Adam. You know, the cameo with the guy that Warner Brothers have now confirmed will never be Superman ever again. With Marvel Studios, you actually think they could go in any direction. Any of the other pre-Marvel Studios superhero franchise film characters could come back in the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, and that's exciting. Things just feel a lot more optimistic on the Marvel side of the fence. There isn't any barrier in place that really prevents Marvel from using any character or going in any particular direction. Even a studio owning the film rights to one of their characters isn't a problem. Marvel will find a way to work something out, because it's in their best interest to. When they see a demand for something, they meet it. But Warner Brothers can't even seem to get a film off the ground with characters they actually own and people want to see. And Warner Brothers does the opposite of what Marvel are doing when it comes to hyping up their films. WB builds what I like to call anti-hype around their projects. With Warner Brothers, it's always bad news. If it's not news that one of their major actors has stepped away from a role, it's that a project you wanted to see was cancelled, or it's the news that the cameos with the characters you actually wanted to see have been erased from the final cut of a movie and you'll never get to see them now. When you check the media news sites and you see the DC logo pop up, you just know that it's not going to be good news. Even the projects that they do well with and that are well received by general audiences have a sword hanging over them. To be honest, the only good news you ever hear out of Warner Brothers is that a bunch of higher-ups or executives have been fired. You know, years ago, if Warner Brothers announced a movie slate with even half of these projects, I would have been so happy. But I just can't work up any hype or even real interest in this reboot plan. Primarily because there's a real possibility that none of these new film projects Gunn is looking to develop will actually get made. Considering that we're almost 2.5 years out from seeing the first in Gunn's slate, anything could change within Warner Brothers in that time. There's still 4 more films left in this universe before we get to Gunn's reboot, and who's to say Warner Brothers will even want to or will even be in a position to continue on with the DCU in any incarnation if Shazam 2 or Aquaman 2 or even The Flash don't bring in the box office. That's also a real possibility. Warner Brothers aren't going to keep eating losses on these films like they have been with Black Adam and Birds of Prey and the last Suicide Squad film. If these films keep coming in under projection, eventually Warner Brothers will call it a day on this whole shared universe experiment. It won't matter if superhero films are the big thing right now. Warner Brothers as a company aren't in a position to keep throwing good money after bad on something that just isn't delivering. Superhero movies are practically a license to print money at the box office for other studios, but it's looking more and more likely that superhero films for Warner Brothers at least are a liability. And honestly, it is kind of hard to get excited for James Gunn's new 8 to 10 year plan after so many false starts over the last 10 years. I mean, Warner Brothers has spent the better part of that 10 years dicking around the fans, audiences, and their own actors and directors. I mean, I've lost count of the amount of films that Warner Brothers have announced and just never actually got around to making. The overall plan for the DC universe seems to change by the week. I mean, Christ, up until a few weeks ago, Warner Brothers didn't even know which actor was sticking around to play Batman. I mean, look at this. Affleck's out as Batman. Keaton's in as the new Batman. Sorry, I mean Keaton's out and Affleck's back in. Sorry, I mean both Affleck and Keaton are out. James Gunn is rebooting the entire universe. Are you excited to watch both of these guys never appear as Batman ever again after this film? And while it's nice that Warner Brothers have finally realized after 10 years they actually need a plan and someone with an understanding of these characters and this universe to manage it all, Warner Brothers having a plan is no guarantee whatsoever that any films will ever get made. Even Warner Brothers officially announcing a film is getting made isn't a guarantee it'll actually get made. I mean, we're at the stage now where Warner Brothers even casting, shooting, and finishing a movie isn't any guarantee you'll actually see it. You can say I'm being cynical here, and you'd probably be right, but to be fair, up to this point, the average life cycle of an announced DC property went something like this. Step 1. Announce a totally random project. First announce a new film right out of nowhere as being in development, probably with a director attached. Now, this project will usually fly in the face of the existing slate of announced movies. Take Nightwing for example. I don't think Dick Grayson actually exists in this universe, and if it means getting a Nightwing film, I'll take what I can get. Step 2. Scripting. Now the long road of getting a script together begins. Now, most studios will already have some kind of script already in the bag before announcing a project, and if not a script, at least a general outline or treatment to work with. Now notice how I said most studios, because Warner Brothers are not most studios, and an announced Warner Brothers superhero flick can sit in scripting stage for any length of time. You're looking at about 1.5 to 2 years here. Step 3. Start raising those hopes. So at this stage the film has been announced for about 2 years, and you're hearing drips of information that the script is almost done. There might even be talk of a start date, so things are starting to look up. This film might actually get made. Step 4. Fire the director. Now this project is getting dangerously close to becoming a reality, and you don't want that, so that director has to go. In the press release you can say that it was scheduling conflicts or creative differences. It doesn't really matter. Step 5. Confirm that the project is still in active development and that a new director is being sought out. This step will make people think that the project actually has a future. Step 6. Hire a new director, restart the script. So good news, we found a new director for the project and we're back on track. The bad news is, he wants to go in his own direction with the project, and that means a new script. So we're going to need to jump back to step 2 scripting again. Step 7. Radio silence. Remain totally silent on where the project stands for about 12 to 18 months. Then start drip feeding information that the new script is taking shape and that it's pretty good. Drop some hints that it might even be adapting some big storyline from the comics. That will get people interested again. Step 8. Fire the new director. Yeah, you heard that one right. But if you've been following this project for any length of time, this won't come as any surprise to you. You've probably already seen that the director has signed on with a totally different studio and is now working on another project for them. Step 9. Yeah, sure, it's still in development. By this stage, the project has been announced for about 5 years, so you still need to say it's in active development to save some face, even though the dogs on the street know this thing is never going to get made at this point. Step 10. Announce a new project. I mean, it's great that there's a plan and everything now, but it's kind of hard to get hype for when apparently this plan didn't even exist a few months ago. Up until a few weeks back, Warner Brothers still thought Henry Cavill was going to be Superman going forward, so that doesn't exactly fill me with confidence in this new plan. And really, why would anyone have any confidence in Warner Brothers as a studio to execute James Gunn's 4 to 8 year plan? I mean, look how the last plan panned out. Warner Brothers are basically a laughing stock of a studio now. I think a 2-year plan would be ambitious for Warner Brothers at this stage, and I've seen nothing from Zaslav's new management structure to make me think that things are well in hand. Actually, it's quite the opposite. I don't think this reboot plan is the cure-all that Warner Brothers thinks it is either. Maybe a reboot is just too late at this point to get general audiences back on board. The damage has already kind of been done. DC on film is a tarnished brand at this point. People associated with mediocre or just outright bad films. And kind of like how the last Schumacher Batman film tarnished Batman as a property in the 90s. All the bad DCU films up to this point have had a kind of a cumulative effect of tarnishing the DC brand itself. People just have low expectations of it now. This is one of the reasons why DC films are really underperforming at the box office. People just don't want to show up opening weekend for a film that has at best a coin flip odds of being good. After Man of Steel, or at the latest after Batman v Superman, that would have been the right time for a reboot. But now after 10 plus years of brand mismanagement, trying to get audiences interested in DC as a brand again, let alone invested, that's going to be a very hard sell. For that to happen, James Gunn would have to be delivering absolute bangers. Not just good films, but great ones, and regularly. You will have to change people's perception of DC on film totally. But even delivering quality films and shows might not be the biggest problem Gunn will have to overcome with the new DCU. Gunn is working on an 8-year plan for the DC universe, right? But I'm not sure there's even 8 years left in the superhero genre at this point. People have been showing up for superhero films in a big way pretty much since the early 2000s. And while I hate to say it, superhero films will eventually fade out to be replaced by the next genre staple. This stuff comes in waves, and the superhero wave has already been going for 20 plus years now. Kind of seems like the right time to capitalize on a shared superhero universe was 10 years ago when this wave was at its peak. Rebooting the DCU now just feels a little too late. This whole reboot plan kind of puts Warner Brothers in a really strange position as well. I don't think I've ever heard of a studio announcing plans for a reboot of their universe while they still have films left in their current universe. But then again, I've never heard of a studio sinking $80 million into a film and not releasing it either, so go figure I guess. Warner Brothers are playing by their own rules. Here's our reboot plans, but also get hyped for Aquaman and Shazam and The Flash, even though we're going to reboot this entire thing and you'll probably never see any of these characters ever again. I mean, what if the Flash film actually does hit big with audience? This is a film where Warner Brothers are introducing new characters like Supergirl and reintroducing old ones like Michael Keaton as Batman. What if people are actually bowled over by Sasha Calle as Supergirl? What would that mean for James Gunn's future DCEU plans? What does that mean for that Supergirl film he has planned? What happens if people really love seeing Keaton and Affleck as Batman again, and want more of that? What does that mean for that Batman the Brave and the Bold project? Warner Brothers have actually managed to put themselves in a position where if The Flash actually succeeds, that could mean even more problems for them. They might have to start revising their new slate and changing direction again before it's even gotten off the ground. So even if they win and The Flash is a big success, they still kind of lose. And look, none of this is a knock on James Gunn whatsoever. I really like James Gunn. He's a really talented guy. He's a great writer and director with a good eye for making complicated and interesting characters. And I'm sure he's only got the best of intentions for this universe and these characters. And while I have faith in James Gunn as a filmmaker and a writer, I don't have any faith in Warner Brothers as a studio to execute any plan, be it 10 years or 3 years or even 1 year after what I've seen from them in the last decade, management change or not. Warner Brothers as a studio still feels to me at least like a studio in flux. I have no real reason to believe that Warner Brothers will be able to deliver even 10% of what Gunn is planning. I actually think it's a lot more likely that I'll open my browser one morning and see that James Gunn has walked away from Warner Brothers due to some corporate bullshit, or he's been fired or something like that, than it is that we'll even get to see half of this new slate. But what do you think? Am I being a bit too harsh on Warner Brothers here? Let me know in the comments, what do you think of James Gunn's new DCU slate reveal, and do you have any real faith in Warner Brothers as a studio to execute it? And as always, thanks for watching.